Buonasera, benvenuti alla Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò della New York University. Thank you for braving the weather and coming out in this frigid night to hear this discussion of noise in the waters. Many of you know that we had the pleasure to present this theatrical piece here 2 years ago, I believe. And in that occasion, we all hoped that Marco Martinelli and Teatro delle Albe would be able to bring the performance of Noise in the Waters to a major New York theater. They did. And at about 2 years from that evening in which they presented a sort of a preview of the show on this stage, Marco and Jacopo Rampini, it was at that time, in an Italian and English dialogue, they're here because their show is coming to La Mama Theater, and it's opening is it tomorrow or in 2 days? On the 30th. All the information for getting tickets at La Mama are on our website, or you can go directly to the website of La Mama. And we're very excited. We're very excited because it's an Italian theater company that is bringing a fully staged production to a major and incredibly prestigious New York stage. And also we are very happy to see them bring such a brave, courageous, and strong piece of theater to this stage. As you know, the piece deals with the issue of immigration from Northern Africa, and especially with the constant and unfortunately ongoing tragedy of what happens between the northern coast of Africa and the southern coast of Sicily still now. For many people it was a revelation when they saw that the Pope last summer went to Lampedusa and recognized this tragedy in a very visual and open to the world place. But Marco and his company have been bringing this problem to the attention of the public for a long time. So we are very glad to hear that this piece is now welcome to the United States, that there is more discussion about this issue, and that there are more people that are getting involved in this issue. Our presentation deals with both the artistic aspects of the performance, the theatrical aspects of the performance, but also with the sociological and political aspects of the issue. So we have a very rich evening, and before moving forward, I would like to tell you that the person that helped me the most in organizing this presentation is also the person that is going to moderate the discussion in the round table. She's a friend and a dear colleague, Teresa Fiore. Teresa holds the Insera Endowed Chair in Italian and Italian-American Studies and serves as Associate Professor of Italian in the Department of Spanish and Italian Studies at Montclair State University. Teresa has been here very often. She's incredibly generous with her time and with her many, many talents. Her research interests concentrate on Italian 20th and 21st century literature, and her ongoing project that is forthcoming as a book deals with the preoccupied spaces, remapping Italy's immigration, and post-colonialism. So she's really the expert that we needed to bring together all these different aspects of Noise in the Water. And I would like to ask Teresa to come to the podium and introduce our guests of tonight. Thank you all again for being here with us.
Good evening, everybody. Buonasera, benvenuti, welcome. Thank you, Stefano. Always a pleasure to be back and to work and be part of these projects alla Casa. Besides Stefano, Albertini, and Casa Italiana, I would like also to thank Larry Wolf at the Center of European and Mediterranean Studies, a center at NYU that is co-sponsoring tonight's event, and also many other people that are making this broader initiative possible, and in particular Anna Fiore from the Scuola d'Italia, for initiating this conversation with the Teatro delle Albe, Mia you, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, from La Mama for including the piece, the play, for 3 weekends here in New York. And there is a flyer that hopefully we can distribute, otherwise you can pick it up upstairs, that has been put together to give you a sense of this larger project. And thank you to Andrea Paciotta also for helping with that. Since this is really a US tour. It's New York, it's New Jersey, and it's also Chicago. And it includes workshops with students, it includes music presentations, and so they're really bringing an incredible richness to our area, and we feel honored and incredibly grateful to have all of you. Let me introduce to you the Teatro delle Albe to start with. So the company was founded in Ravenna in 1983 by Marco Martinelli and Ermanna Montanari, along with Luigi Dadina and Marcella Nonni. What is interesting about the Teatro delle Albe is that it has one foot in the tradition of theater and one foot in the experimentation that theater brings with it. So on the one hand, they have reread in very original ways classical pieces by Shakespeare, as well as Molière, in particular the Miser. But they've also been developing their own plays and in very unique ways that I would like to read for the purpose of tonight's event, in particular with reference to issues of borders, migration, otherness, foreignness. The Teatro delle Albe is engaged with a wide variety of issues and topics, but I find it particularly relevant to mention the fact that they have a strong connection with Africa, and maybe they will tell us their own geography around the connection between Ravenna and Africa. And they have worked with African artists, in particular from Senegal. They have interestingly reread Alfred Jarry's Ubu in their own unique ways, creating Ubu Bur, Mighty Mighty Ubu, taking it to Senegal, taking it to Chicago, working with the most diverse groups of people, including children and adolescents in particularly extreme situations as well. I'm thinking of their work in Scampia outside of Naples. For all this work that is in part conducted also through the Non Scuola, a very beautiful name for a scuola that wants to bring theater to young people before they discover it on their own, and they may not like it. They've been recognized in particular with 14 Ubu prizes. The Ubu prize is like the Oscar award in Italy for theater. And 14 of them is an incredible number. And many, many other prizes. Lo Straniero Prize dedicated to the memory of Carmelo Bene, and at international festivals around the world. In 1991, they created Ravenna Teatro, Teatro Stabile di Innovazione, one of the more lively theatrical centers in Italy. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. Mostly we're here to present the book Noise in the Waters, Rumore di Acque, which has been recently published. And so this will be the running thread for us, and it will be an occasion to look at the issue of immigration in the Mediterranean from a sociological point of view, from a literary point of view, as well as from an artistic point of view in more general terms. The book was basically created by Marco Martinelli, who's the author of Noise in the Waters, Rumore di Acque, translated by Thomas Simpson, who teaches at Northwestern University, and was published for the first time in the journal California Italian Studies, and is now made available in a really beautiful publication by Bordighera Press. Many thanks go to Anthony Tamburi, who's the head of Bordighera Press. And it's a book that in a way mimics another one that came out in Italy, which had the script as well as some essays in it. But these are new essays. And in particular, I would like to mention the one by Franco Nasi and Glenda Garelli, besides the introduction by Marco himself, the author, and Thomas Simpson, the translator. The books are available tonight, and so you can also get a chance to look at them and to have them. What is Noise in the Waters? Maybe most of you are not familiar with the actual text and play. It is a monologue, a very intense monologue that transfigures into grotesque and melancholic poetry the tragic account of migrants adrift in the Mediterranean. It develops through the figure of a demonic and sarcastic general, the inhabitant of a phantom islet between Africa and Europe, who evokes the spirits of the lost at sea. Midway between sorcerer's seance and a bureaucratic catalogue, the general's monologue, powerfully delivered by Alessandro Renda, is accompanied by the musicians Enzo and Lorenzo Mancuso, who, with their deep voices of ancient deities, seem to howl the pain of humanity from the depths of an abyss. Martinelli himself has called this a prayer, un oratorio per I sacrificati, namely the sacrificed perishing in a massacre occurring under our own eyes between a reality show and a soccer championship, thus putting the emphasis on how this has been incredibly televised and conveyed through media. And this is something that we are going to address tonight. Mostly this has happened in indifference or in a general torpor, right? So the ways in which we're going to the ways in which the evening is going to unfold is, first of all, we're going to have Francesca Degiuli to give us a context around the issue of immigration in the Mediterranean from a sociological point of view. I will then give you a reading of the text in more literary terms, because the text really deserves that type of reading. And then we're going to have all the artists on stage with us, and we can start a conversation about the play, which is what you will be able to enjoy in New York in the next 3 weekends. So it is my pleasure now to invite Francesca Degiuli to the podium. She holds a PhD in sociology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and is assistant professor at Farleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. Her research interests lie at the intersection of gender, globalization, immigration, and work, and she's interested in the link between culture and political economy. And her current project is about the badanti, the caretakers, elderly caretakers in Italy, fundamentally a new economic sector that is the result of the longevity of Italians and at the same time of the presence of immigrants. So thank you, Francesca, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this issue that, as you can imagine, is dear to my heart. My research is centered on issues of migration. I would like to start by bringing you back for a second to that night of October 3rd, 2013, when a beat-up, unseaworthy freighter left a dock in Tripoli on the Libyan coast, carrying a cargo of 518 migrants. Most of them had come from Eritrea and Somalia through North Africa in order to reach Europe. The ship was headed across the Mediterranean Sea toward the small island of Lampedusa. But inside of the islet of Conigli, the engines of the freighter stopped and the water began to take on water. In a panic, one passenger set a blanket on fire to call for help, but the flames spread to the engine's spilled fuel, which exploded. People ran away from the blaze, and the shifting weight made the freighter capsize. The passenger fell into the sea. Most couldn't swim. Only 155 were able to tread water long enough to be picked up. The other 363 people drowned. Many of them were children. A few days later, on October 11, another boat sank, this time 70 miles south of Lampedusa. This time, 268 Syrians, including 60 children, were left to die in the water. Notwithstanding 3 phone calls the passengers played to the Italian Naval Operations Center. And many think that the death toll of that actual boat could be much higher because, according to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, survivors told that the boat was carrying between 400 to 500 people. So these terrible tragedies, so close to one another, were perhaps more powerful than the Pope in bringing the attention of the world to this area, a place, more specifically a body of water, where these tragedies are not uncommon. According to Fortress Europe, an NGO that has been tracking the drownings in the area, more than 7,000 people have lost their lives between 1994 and 2013 in these waters. And once again, it's difficult to talk about numbers when talking about immigration, because these may be an underestimate, once again, because they do not account for all the boats that sank without anybody knowing. The number, though, is useful because it tells us the Mediterranean, and particularly in the Strait of Sicily, is really a deadly area. And the question is why? Why is that part, that body of water, so deadly? So it is important to look at who are the migrants that are trying to cross the water to enter Europe. And it's important to think about that they are actually part of a much larger flow of people attempting to migrate to Europe. In reality, the majority of migrants that are considered irregular migrants in Italy arrive by plane. And they actually, study shows that the majority of these irregular migrants have entered Italy with valid documents and have overstayed their visa. So the people that are actually crossing from North Africa are a minority. They are 15% of the totality of the immigrants that try to reach Europe. But very often they're made to be the larger numbers because they give a sense of invasion, of people trying to come to the shore of Italy through this area. The point is that those who cannot enter Italy these ways then try different routes. And one of the most dangerous is the one that is called the Central Mediterranean route. And that's the one that we are addressing in this conversation and that we're talking about for the most part. The Central Mediterranean route is one that in recent months has seen an increase in the number of people trying to cross. A report of the UN Refugee Agency states that the number of migrants attempting to cross through this route has more than doubled from 10,000 in 2012 to 26,000 in 2013. The Central Mediterranean route goes from Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt as well, to Sicily and the nearby island. And is only one of the many different migratory routes towards Europe. Others include the Western Mediterranean route, the Eastern Mediterranean route, the circular route from Greece and Albania, the Western Balkan route, and the Eastern Borders one. Just the sheer number of these routes, it tells you how difficult it is to now enter Europe. And that migrants are pushed to different areas to try to reach not just Italy, but Europe as well. As you know, the countries of traditional migration, like England, Germany, and France, have progressively closed their borders. And so a lot of the migratory pressure is now on Italy, not per se as a country of destination, but in many cases just as a country of transit towards other areas. All of these different routes that I am presenting to you, and I wish I could have that visual to show you, also carry different people. So, for example, the Central Mediterranean route, the one we're talking about, now carries for the most part people that come from Syria, from Eritrea and Somalia. And the eastern ones, for example, instead center some people coming from Afghanistan and other areas. What is becoming evident, though, is that through these routes, the immigrants that are coming in are, for the most part, immigrants that are fleeing areas where there is conflict, are immigrants that are fleeing areas with unrest, differently from other kind of migrants that may choose to pursue other routes. What is interesting is that all these different routes, aside from carrying different migrants to different destinations, also change their fortunes over time, depending on the agreements that receiving countries like Italy make with transitions countries to control migration. One of the problems is that countries of the global north, receiving countries, not just Italy and Europe, but we have similar problems in the US, one of the most important and most common response to immigration is to close the borders, right? What we have seen is that in order to control migration, in order to control the growing numbers of people that have been displaced by war, certainly, but also by globalization, has been to close the borders. And because of the fact that these borders are closing, and because of the fact that more and more countries are gating themselves, are making it impossible for people to migrate, it is becoming, countries like Europe, countries like Italy are trying to find ways to control migration in different ways. And one thing that they have done in recent years is to try to outsource border control. So Italy, for example, has done that, in particular the government with Berlusconi, to create, to outsource to countries like Libya, for example, and Tunisia, in order to have them stop the migrants at the border. So the Central Mediterranean route, for example, has been an important entry point to the European Union for irregular migrants for a long time. And in 2008, nearly 40,000 migrants were detected in that area. Most migrants back then were nationals of Tunisia, Nigeria, Somalia, and Eritrea. But that traffic stopped almost completely when the Italian government outsourced to Gaddafi the control of the border. And they did that by signing the bilateral agreement with Libya in 2009. Then, after that, civil unrest erupted in Tunisia and Libya in 2011, and that too brought a spike of people trying to cross through this route. Nearly 60,000 arrivals happened in 2011. Between January and March only, some 20,000 Tunisian, mostly economic migrants heading mainly to France in search of job opportunities, arrived again on Lampedusa. And these numbers were again reduced in the second quarter of that year by an accelerated repatriation agreement between Italy and Tunisia. Between March and August 2011, however, exceptionally high numbers of sub-Saharan Africans departing from Libya arrived on Lampedusa, and to a lesser degree on Sicily and Malta, many of whom were forcibly expelled by the Gaddafi regime, and most of whom applied for asylum in Italy. With the end of the Gaddafi regime in August 2011, the migratory pressure dropped off greatly, and detection on this route in 2012 stood lower at 10,000. But then again, we see a resurgence in 2013. So the changes in fortunes of these routes shows that Europeans and Italians, as I said, are trying to outsource the border control to what are known as transit countries, as in the case of Libya and Tunisia. But the problem with these agreements is that they are often made with debatable political figures that very often use migration control or lack of it as a political tool. And what is most important is that they have a complete disregard of human rights of these migrants. Returning to that route. So how does that migration happen through this route? The majority of these migrants actually attempt the crossing through small boats. And Libya has become the most important point of departure, because smugglers seem to be able to operate with relative ease in this area, thanks to porous borders and the lack of an effective control. Many of these migrants come from the Horn of Africa, and for them, the crossing of the Mediterranean is only the last leg of a much longer journey that already had a lot of trouble through it. They've seen a lot of trouble through it. Syrians fleeing the war are the majority of these migrants, at least in 2013. But there are also, as I mentioned before, a sizable numbers of Eritreans and Somalis that try to cross through that route. There are also migrants coming from Nigeria, Niger, Mali, and Sudan. One of these, the problem with the fact that countries have made it very difficult for migrants to move from one area to the next is the fact that, and this is something that we encounter also in the United States, people don't stop their attempts to cross a border. if they are motivated to do so, if they're motivated to move either because of conflict, either because of war, either because of their inability to find a job to feed their children, they will try another route. And when they try to do that by closing borders, the problem is that what we see is that they are just pushed only towards routes that are much more dangerous and where the chances of dying are even higher. And that is one element. The second element that we need to keep in mind is that when we close borders, and this I forgot to say is one of the reasons, once again, for example, why this route has become so successful. It's also because the migrants of Somalia and Eritrea that used to go in other parts of the world, like Yemen and Israel, no longer can do that because those areas have been gated as well. Then what they do is that they tend to resort to smugglers more than they would have done in any other situation. And by doing that, we're just fueling a criminal organization that is growing so not just in Africa, but in Mexico and in Arizona and in other areas. And we are creating and supporting this industry instead of trying to find a social pact that actually responds to the growing need of people to move. Let me know, I can go on forever. I'm sure you don't want to hear me forever. So I'm going to pass it on again back to Teresa, and hopefully if you have a question, I can answer later.
Thank you, Francesca. This was very useful to have a geographical context around the issue that we're discussing tonight, which is a basic premise to the book that we're discussing. And also, as you noticed, Francesca mentioned a lot of numbers. So I'm going to use that to move on to my part, which wants to be mostly a reading of the actual text. If there is somebody ready to show us the clip. Yes? You can get, I think, a taste of what Noise in the Waters is by looking at a trailer, which was made by Alessandro Renda, and will introduce you to the play, but hopefully also to the text. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Julian. So I hope this has given you a few basic elements that will probably allow you to follow some of the thoughts that I want to share with you after reading this really, really beautiful text written by Marco Martinelli. I want to read it by using a string of words that are all related etymologically, and they are contare, raccontare, riraccontare, and cantare. So they don't work exactly the same in English, but almost count, recount, re-recount, and I guess chant, which would be to sing. I was inspired in thinking about this string of words by Rosa Balistreri, so we have an immediate link to Sicily and the Mancuso brothers, in her beautiful song Cantu e Cuntu, no? When she says cantu e cuntu, pi non perdere lo conto. I sing and tell stories. I tell stories and I sing in order not to lose the count. And I think this is exactly what the text does, at least for me as a reader, because in moving from the numbers that Francesca shared with us, these are the numbers of the sociologists, the numbers of the journalists, the numbers of people who politically manipulate also this phenomenon and experience. But these numbers are turned into human stories. So this transition is very important to understand the noise in the waters. Now, Marco Martinelli and the Teatro delle Albe are not the first ones to do that. There are journalists who've been particularly sensitive to the need to move from numbers to stories. I'm thinking of Gabriele Del Grande, whose work in Fortress Europe, the blog, as well as Mamadou va a morire, a beautiful book, has been an inspiration for Marco Martinelli. He's the one who wrote, "Only the fish could relate the stories of a carnivorous sea." And I think that's an emblematic sentence to understand what the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum, has turned into, fundamentally a liquid cemetery. At the same time, other people have been of inspiration with their work. I'm thinking of Gianni Maria Bellus, I fantasmi di Portopalo of 2004, Fabrizio Gatti's Bilal of 2009, and a really beautiful documentary that was discussed here, Casa Italiana come un uomo sulla terra, with Daggy Mayer. I think very much linked to Noise in the Waters, because it's about somebody who's the object of the media representation of the immigrant to becoming the subject of telling the story. I could tell you many, many more titles, Stefano Liberti's A Sud di Lampedusa, many memoirs, many films, such as Vincenzo Mara's Tornando a Casa, Crealese's Terraferma. In Italy, this topic has been addressed by many, many journalists, many writers, mostly Italian. So Io e l'altro is probably, by Mosen Melliti, the only one that addresses it from the point of view, along with Come un uomo sulla terra, from the point of view of the migrant. So recounting means telling stories, right? Turning to the human, listening to the laments of the world, like the donkey of Giordano Bruno, the condition of Asinitas that the Teatro delle Albe considers to be the premise to discover and to understand. In other words, they have dramatized the numbers. At the same time, they have not erased them. In the text, you see a lot of numbers, and yet they have not, and Marco in particular, has not offered to us a humanitarian tale of good intentions, because these numbers become monsters, like the general that Alessandro Renda interprets, because he's effectively the bad conscience of the European Union, of Italy, of the West at large, that is closing borders, and as Francesca was saying, effectively participating in a complicitous way in this rejection of the migrants, in pushing back, in securitizing the borders and militarizing the Mediterranean. So what they have done is the teatralizzazione del mare, and I'm here borrowing from a book by Laura Mariani on Ermanna Montanari, Fare, disfare and rifare, where this concept of teatralizzare lo spazio is very important, and we're going to talk about space in a moment. But it's teatralizzazione del mare, ma anche also teatralizzazione del male, because obviously this is a work about the evil that we are complicitous with. At the same time, this work recounts, and here I'm going to just say a couple of words, but I would love to hear from Marco and the rest of the company about this, because the work is doing two things. It's recounting, retelling the universal story of the sea through Shakespeare's The Tempest, through Melville's Moby Dick, through Coleridge's The Ancient Mariner, through even Philip Dick's apocalyptical scenarios, right? So the reference is a constant, and we will talk with Marco about what it means to bring all of this together while also retelling the story of other plays by Le Albe. Rumore d'Acque, for example, was the title of another play that Le Albe presented in the mid-80s. And it is a very different topic. At the same time, the water as, of course, a very similar function. The water as a mirror, the water as an occasion to reflect, right, on some of the tensions of a society, especially at the end of a trajectory where there's a debacle of civilization, effectively, right? So in this sense, it's also in dialogue with other works like Lo Straniero, I Refrattari, and even the character of the general seems to pick up on Arlecchino, La Commedia dell'Arte, and its special twist that the Teatro delle Albe has given to this tradition and to this Italian tradition. Now, Franco Nasi in the book has done a really beautiful job. It's a really sophisticated essay that I highly recommend, that really looks at all these different threads that get interwoven. But at the same time, there is another level to the play, and that's where cantare, chanting and singing, comes into place. And this is because the role of the voice, you probably heard Alessandro a little bit, is really, really central. The work on the voice has been very important for the Teatro delle Albe, mostly because of the work of Ermanna Montanari. And so it'll be interesting for us to address now with the company members this issue of the general's voice, right? And where it comes from and how it gets enacted. And at the same time, we will discuss, in particular with Ermanna, how the text has moved from the page to the stage, and how space has been influential and inspirational, especially when they were all in Mazara del Vallo, right, working with the local Tunisian immigrant community, and they came up with the idea of dramatizing this on the stage. When I say singing and chanting, I'm also, of course, thinking of Enzo and Lorenzo Mancuso, because they bring their voices to the play, ancient bards of Sicilian music, and at the same time contemporary interpreters of this tradition, in particular for theater, but also for cinema. Their mesmerizing voices have been stretched to the limits in this occasion. In the Italian book, they say that they have worked trying to give voice to the dead migrants lying at the bottom of the sea. This is, of course, an almost impossible task, and yet when you hear them, you realize that I think they've made it possible, indeed, for us with their research. I would like to close my remarks by asking the question, what does it mean to present a noise in the waters in the US? And I'm here reminded of two things. The first one is that many, many Italians themselves have died at sea. They have died immigrating to countries like the United States, for example. So stories of losses at sea, adventurous voyages, exploitation, cold treatment, a reduction to numbers. We can think of Ellis Island, for example, are part of the history of Italy in its international scenario of diaspora. They're part of the history of this country, obviously, even though often we forget about that. We have forgotten in Italy, and we tend to forget here. There are many, many beautiful texts that I've not forgotten. I'm here reminded of De Amicis sull'Oceano, for example, on the ocean, and a beautiful story by Leonardo Sciascia called Il Lungo Viaggio, where a group of Sicilians tries to emigrate to Trenton, New Jersey, illegally. So this goes back a long, long time. I'm reminded of Gian Maria Testa's beautiful songs in Da questa parte del mare, and of course the most important works from a scholarly point of view or journalistic point of view, Odissee italiani sulle rotte del sogno e del dolore di Gian Antonio Stella, and the work of Sandro Rinauro on l'emigrazione clandestina degli italiani nel secondo dopoguerra. So we have been the people that Francesca has told us about. We have been the Yusuf, the Jean-Baptiste, the Sakina of the present. And as Gualtiero Bertelli, an ethnomusicologist and a performer and singer of the Compagnia delle Acque, has poignantly put it in his beautiful song Noi, we on the docks 100 years ago. Now from our tables replete with food, with a short and sleepy memory, we rush to start afresh from the other side of the barricade. Noise will speak to the US in other ways as well, because of course we understand talking about the Mediterranean Sea means talking about the Caribbean Sea, if we think of the route between Cuba and the United States, and mostly the physical border between US and Mexico, where so far probably between 3,000 and 5,000 people have died trying to cross. Again, this is an estimate. Many more people cannot be counted, unfortunately, in this terrible number. In conclusion, Noise joins scholars, Noise in the Waters, I mean, joins scholars, activists, politicians, and the larger public who are reacting against the massacre, and does so through a refined and effective artistic feat. So it is not a surprise that it has been chosen by Amnesty International as a work worth of its message to shake our consciences, to go against torpor, silence, and indifference, and also to remind us that shifting alliances, of course, happens when we forget. It happens in the absence of memory and when we lack analysis and empathy. But I want to conclude by saying that in creating a different space for reflecting on this issue, they are thinking of a polis. The word polis is very important for the Teatro delle Albe, but it's not a polis that has to do with Italy only. It has to do with a much larger world at this point. So it's a collectivity that needs to engage with these questions across borders in a globalized world. Now, they do it in a humanitarian way. It's a humanitarian endeavor. But I cannot stop repeating how much they do it in an incredibly well-rooted way in the humanities. Humanities and humanitarianism. And this is why this is so precious. So it's been a pleasure to read this text, and I can't wait to hear the comments from Marco Martinelli, Ermanna Montanari, and Alessandro Renda, whom I invite here, along with Francesca, to continue the conversation and also take questions from the audience. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the people we have on stage now. So Marco Martinelli, as I said before, is the co-founder of the Teatro delle Albe. And he's not only an author, and a playwright. He's also the director of many of the plays presented by the Teatro delle Albe, and has been the director of the Ravenna Teatro Center since 1991. And he directs many of the workshops that are offered through the Non Scuola, along with Alessandro Renda very often. And this is their work that they do with adolescents, as I was saying before. Here in this area, they're going to present Heresy of Happiness at the Scuola d'Italia here in New York. And also they're going to work with the students at Montclair State. Let me ask you, Marco, about the text, as I was saying before. So how did you bring together all these different reverberations and influences in a pretty compact text? Because the play itself is actually 1 hour, including music, so it's quite compact. Le fonti, le influenze, come...
Parlo in italiano. Sì.
I will translate. You will hear my voice a lot tonight.
Però prima devo fare due o tre ringraziamenti, certo. Per forza, perché...
And by the way, actually, do we need to translate into English?
No?
Is everybody fluent in Italian? Can you follow? Yes. No, some people are not, so we'll translate.
Vado?
Vai.
Vado. Allora, no, il ringraziamento prima di tutto a Stefano Albertini, perché qui 2 anni fa insieme con Jacopo abbiamo recitato qualche frammento di Rumore di Acque e da allora è stato come se fosse un primo germe, un primo seme da cui è nata tutta questa lunga permanenza di 1 mese, soprattutto a New York e poi nel New Jersey e a Chicago. E poi c'è Anna Fiore qui in sala, che è preside del Guglielmo Marconi, con la quale stiamo facendo questo progetto, Teresa Fiore stessa che ci ospita in un progetto bellissimo nel New Jersey. E mi piace sottolineare questi ringraziamenti perché sono il segno anche di come io, Ermanna, Alessandro, il Teatro delle Albe, lavoriamo da 30 anni. Cioè la nostra concezione del teatro è un grande, bellissimo lavoro collettivo.
You had promised you wouldn't talk for long, but...
Avevo capito che non mi traduceva, avevo capito, allora stavo andando.
Dobbiamo tradurre, sì. So many of the people he thanked at the beginning were actually mentioned, and so Stefano Albertini, Anna Fiore, myself, so we don't need a second introduction. All of this started 2 years ago, exactly on this stage, when with Jacopo Rampini, in a very beautiful performance. It's not easy to do it in 2 languages. They actually shared the text with us. It was a seed. It was an appetizer, un antipasto, and here we are with 1 month, a big festa with the Teatro delle Albe in 3 different locations. Towards the end, Marco said something very important. This teatro has been in existence for 30 years, and the central idea is to do it in a collective way, to do it as a group, and that's why thanking people means including them in this group.
Sì, e quindi la magia del teatro è quest'arte del riuscire a stare insieme e a creare bellezza insieme. Adesso vado più piano.
Poignant, the magics of theater, which is the beauty of being together and creating together. So,
e così il Rumore di Acque, che spero che verrete a vedere, non esiste per esempio nella nostra versione se non con la forza incredibile, la magia musicale e sonora dei nostri fratelli Mancuso.
And Noise in the Waters is another example of this collective work, because in this case we have the Mancuso brothers who've been included in this collective work.
Mi chiedevi le fonti di Rumore di Acque. Come per tutti i miei testi, da una parte c'è la biblioteca e dall'altra c'è la biblioteca della vita.
Like for all the texts that I write, on the one hand there is the library, and then on the other there is the library of life.
Da una parte c'è un testo che mi ha nutrito fin da quando ero adolescente e per me è un testo sacro, ed è il Moby Dick di Melville.
And on the other?
Adesso andavo veloce, e dall'altra ci sono tutti i racconti che ho ascoltato a Mazzara del Vallo.
So on the one hand there is a book that has been absolutely central and crucial since I was an adolescent, which is Melville's Moby Dick, and the other one, the stories of the people that I met in Mazzara del Vallo, the stories that I've heard from the immigrants.
La grande letteratura di un Melville o di un Coleridge o di uno Shakespeare e le parole smozzicate tra i denti di Yasmin, che non si chiamava così, ma che mi ha raccontato la sua storia, e questa storia è entrata nello spettacolo, sono on the same level, sullo stesso livello. Shakespeare e la vita nel suo bruciare quotidiano.
So on the one hand, great literature, Shakespeare, Coleridge, Melville. On the other one, bits and pieces, I would say crumbs of stories coming hardly through the teeth of people like Yasmin. That's not the real name, actually, of the person who shared this story. It is, in other words, life in its own burning.
Ed è con questo atteggiamento che poi si scrive, si conta, si racconta, si canta, come dicevi prima tu. Cioè mettendo davvero i capolavori, pensando che una persona che ti parla e che ti racconta la sua tragedia è un capolavoro come l'Amleto. Non c'è differenza. Se fai una differenza non hai capito nulla.
The rest has been, as we were saying before, counting, recounting, tell you stories, because effectively there is no difference between a masterpiece of literature and the story of somebody who is a masterpiece herself and himself is a literary piece. And if you actually distinguish between the two, you're missing the point. Okay. Very good, and we are now going to move to Ermanna Montanari, who is, as I said before, the voice of the Teatro delle Albe, but also a set designer, meaning somebody who actually devises some of these plays. She has created an incredible gallery of characters as part of her work in the past 30 years, and I strongly recommend a beautiful clip that you can find on Radio 3 for Rumore delle Voci, where she actually shares in an hour pretty much all the most important ones, and you can see what she does with her voice. But the question for her tonight, because we're talking about noise in the waters, is how did you move from the text to the stage? Il passaggio dal testo al palcoscenico.
Allora, Rumore di Acque parte prima del testo e prima del palcoscenico, perché parte da una nostra andata a Mazzara del Vallo, che è il paese di origine di Alessandro. Io non ero mai stata a Mazzara del Vallo, e Mazzara del Vallo è un luogo preciso, e si deve sempre avere relazione vocale con un luogo preciso che non si conosce per fare poi uno spettacolo. Io non conoscevo questo luogo, sono arrivata, mi sono innamorata della fatiscenza, dell'architettura di questo posto e ho comprato subito una guida, e dentro questa guida, prendo la pagina, ho letto che a un certo punto, a pochi metri dal mare, all'inizio dell'Ottocento, era uscita una piccola isola vulcanica che aveva fatto bollire il mare e aveva fatto bollire i pesci, e le persone del luogo andavano a raccogliere questi pesci già cotti per mangiarli. Questa isola...
I have to stop you for a second. She promised also, but so Ermanna is actually telling us something very interesting. So Rumore started even before the text, so the genealogy is slightly different. When they all went to Mazzara, which happens to be the place where Alessandro Renda's family is from, and there they basically started interacting with a new place. And for Ermanna, it's very important to understand the voice, to create a sound relation with a place, especially one that she's not familiar with. So as she was in Mazzara del Vallo, a fairly decadent place, architecturally speaking, she picked up a guide and read about the Isola Fernandea. I think it's called Graham's Island in English. Fundamentally an island that appeared in the mid-1800s, and by appearing, it basically caused much commotion in the sea and literally burnt nature and in particular fish around it.
E quindi quando scoprì questo nella guida andai a informarmi, comprai un libro sull'isola Ferdinandea, mentre Marco e Alessandro andavano ad ascoltare i racconti appunto di questi immigrati. Per me io lavoravo parallelamente perché dovevo creare lo spazio di questo rumore di acque, e quindi avevo bisogno di tenere il sangue del nostro mare spazialmente. Come si può passare in un palcoscenico questo sangue, questo colore rosso che il mare non portava, non faceva emergere, ma era un martello sotterraneo. E quindi diedi a Marco questa suggestione dell'isola, come se un vulcano dovesse essere nello spazio scenico. A Marco, dopo tutta questa ricerca, come un rubinetto uscì fuori la drammaturgia di Rumore di Acque.
Okay. So she started reading even more about this island, this phenomenon, and while in the meantime Alessandro and Marco were listening to stories of local immigrants, and that's how she started thinking about the space of Rumore. What was important for her was to convey the idea of the blood of the sea. That is to say, this sea that has a life to it, and yet at the same time it's red with death, fundamentally, and how as a subterranean, an underground hammer, this could be conveyed. And so the idea, the image of the volcano, of course, became the most viable, and in sharing it with Marco, it was like a faucet, and the words that just came out.
Quindi a un certo punto Marco, pensando ad Alessandro e ai fratelli Mancuso, quindi alle loro voci e ai loro corpi, contemporaneamente pensai a uno spazio di marmo, quindi il contrario del sangue, ma il marmo come lapide, quindi ha un grande biancore. E Marco diede a Renda un'indicazione vocale con una voce grattata, e in realtà Renda ha preso come dire, pensate a che cosa può fare il marmo se viene grattato con le unghie. Questa è la voce del generale. Non si può per me mai dividere e condividere uno spazio se non vocalmente. I fratelli Mancuso, in questa grattugia, quindi in questa, diciamo, imperdonabilità della voce del generale.
You want to stop now? Okay, let me do the other part first, then I think it's very important. So in moving from the image of the volcano to the stage, interestingly she thought of marble, so something completely different, something hard, something cold, and that became the main presence on stage, fundamentally conveying the idea of a tombstone. At the same time, the suggestion that she gave to Marco was of a voice that would actually be scratchy and hoarse, right? And that's exactly the grater that was also given not just to Alessandro but also to Enzo and Lorenzo to give flesh, I guess, sì, to the imperdonabilità of what?
Imperdonabile, non si può perdonare la sua voce.
Because his voice cannot be forgiven,
sì,
right? Not Alessandro's, but the
non
general's.
Alessandro, la voce del generale non è perdonabile, sì.
The general's voice is not to
sì,
be forgiven.
Perché è una grattugia, gratta, quindi gratta è un corpo, una voce corpo che gratta quei corpi che sono vittime, mentre le voci di Enzo e Lorenzo sono voci telluriche, proprio quel sangue sotterraneo, quel vulcano che appare e disappare. E anche nello spettacolo, nello spazio scenico, la loro voce è balsamo di questa grattugia.
So on the one hand, Alessandro's voice, the greater, right, that is scratching, and I may add, it's actually scratching us as an audience as well, right? Because we're called to react to this sound. On the other hand, Enzo and Lorenzo work as a balm. That is to say, they're supposed to represent the blood, the telluric movement of the ocean, the volcano, but it's a more therapeutic è più terapeutico,
sì.
È un balsamo.
L'ultima cosa è che per la mamma lo spazio, io sono qui anche per questo, è completamente cambiato, perché ogni luogo parla e la mamma per noi in Italia e non solo, ma comunque è un luogo parlante, sta alle origini anche del nostro modo di pensare teatro e quindi abbiamo ricreato completamente lo spazio, mantenendo comunque un elemento concreto che non sarà il marmo, quindi non sarà tombale, ma un elemento imperdonabile quanto il marmo se grattato.
Okay, so at La Mama, the setup will be slightly different. This is what happens very often with their productions because they interact with every site they work at, not only from a sound point of view, as she was saying, but also in this case in a concrete way. You won't have any marble, so any tombstone, but there's going to be something equally powerful that cannot be done without, and it will still speak to the unforgivability of this act. I think we can now move, thank you Ermanna, to Alessandro Renda, who joined the company, interestingly, as basically one of the adolescents at the non-scuola, and then proved to be so talented that he stayed and joined the company, and is doing many things, not only playing the general with the scratchy voice, but also doing the workshops, as we mentioned, and he's also the videographer for the company, and he's working on a documentary called Mazzara Ravenna 2010 that actually documents this incredible experience. So for Alessandro, I guess, going back to the voice, if you can tell us a little bit about what it has meant to become this general and what you have done to develop this unforgivable voice.
Shards and flaming lava down my throat. Sono le parole di Marco del testo, sono le parole del generale, ma un po' sono le parole anche di me come attore.
So these are the words from the. Do you want to do it in English? No, go ahead.
My English is finished. I speak a basic English and I am so shy for this. I can try, but if you don't understand, raise your hand. Ermanna explained very well the situation, because this character is a very strange character, because Marco wrote thinking to Gheddafi, thinking to a very bad character. And do you know Gheddafi? Gheddafi was a very strange character, a character like for theater, because he was a dictator, he was a real man with power, with relationship with Europe, with all the world, but he was also a character from theater. When he came to Italy, he came with come si dice, esercito, army, yeah, with army of female, like the le Amazzoni, le Amazzoni, Greek Amazons, yeah, and with i tendoni da circo,
like a circus tent.
Yes, with a circus tent. So it was a very strange character. And when Marco wrote the text, thinking about this, he wrote the character of the general in this way. A part is a very hard, strong, and bad character, and very violent, because this character speak about the immigrants, the ghost of the dead, in a brutal way, and he is not funny in a lot of moments. In another way, he is funny, is grotesque. So he's a strange, nightmarish character in which there is all this, the grotesque and the violence.
Okay, very good. So I guess we can open it up to questions from the audience, whether for the company or Francesca Degiuli. Any curiosity, any comment?
Alessandro, a question for you. Ermanna explained very well the adaptation that she has been doing in the setting up the space for the leaving it open. She didn't tell us what we can expect to see, but she told us that she has been working on adapting the theatrical space from what you normally have in Italy, the space of La Mama. And I'm asking you if you're doing anything different with your character when you take your general from Italy and transport him here in New York. Or are we supposed to expect the same general, or a general with slightly different characteristics?
I don't know. I have to wait Thursday. Yes, I have to wait. I can't answer now. I think that with this English, but I think just a little better because I learned by heart something. So I can help something with some parts in English, the audience, because the text is all in Italian, but you can read very well the text because it's an important presence in the new setting. So I don't know. I'm curious. I'm curious. I'm curious because I don't know the answer for the American audience. So we know that for the European audience, this show speaks very well, and for the words that we have listened before, we think that we can speak also for the Americans. Because the immigrations and the story of these people are very similar in every part in the world. And in New York, New York is a very important symbol to understand this. The population have to move. And this is important, and New York is built in this sense, and its riches is this. I hope that this mirror with the Mediterranean Sea or the ocean can understood.
Thank you.
Any other curiosity, Laura?
I would like to know more about the work with the music and the instruments that they chosen.
Maybe we should actually have Lorenzo and Enzo.
Well, we use some Mediterranean instruments like Turkish saz, balama, and successa. Turkish and small flute, also the same area, and an Indian harmonium, and our voice. What I can say that all these instruments, which are not Sicilian, we play in a very personal way. So it's not so important the origin of the instruments, but the use we do with these instruments.
Thank you. Was there something else, Laura, that you wanted to know about the music?
Yes. How did you work collaboration. La collaborazione.
Sì, sì. Ma fin dall'inizio ci siamo trovati subito molto in sintonia nel modo di lavorare, perché era la prima volta che lavoravamo insieme, Teatro delle Albe e Fratelli Mancuso.
It was the first time we worked together with the Mancuso brothers, but we got along very well.
E la sintonia era nel fatto che io non gli ho mandato il testo e loro hanno fatto la colonna sonora, ma siamo stati insieme a lavorare per più di un mese a Ravenna e il lavoro cresceva giorno dopo giorno.
So it's when I say that we were in the same wavelength, I mean that it's not that I gave them the script and I asked them to develop a soundtrack. We actually worked together for a month in Ravenna to develop it together.
Quindi c'era un sentire insieme, una musica, un rapporto con un frammento del testo, era un misurarlo giorno per giorno nell'alchimia quotidiana. È una parola, è un concetto che noi amiamo molto, quello di alchimia. Vuol dire che le cose non si fanno in serie, come nell'industria, ma si fanno come in una bottega artigianale, dove misurare anche il centimetro di un abito o di un tavolino e sentire quella materia anziché quell'altra, ecco, anche lì tutto è sullo stesso piano di affetto, di amore. Tu devi portare amore ad ogni singolo suono, ad ogni singola voce, ad ogni singola parola, e in questo modo alla fine cresce un organismo vivente, perché questo è uno spettacolo, è un organismo vivente, è una pianta a cui bisogna dare acqua e sole tutti i giorni.
So this relationship meant that we were feeling together, that we developed a relationship, that we were measuring every single element of what we were doing together in what they call the alchemy of the quotidian. Alchemy is a very important word for Le Albe because they don't believe in producing things in series, but actually working like an old lab, una bottega, where measuring a single inch is very important, where working with affect and love is fundamental, so that eventually a play that they consider a living organism, a plant that they can water, is finally born. Yes?
Been having this gut feeling that in bringing something like this to the United States, and it's really a gut feeling, I wonder how you didn't think, or how the slave trade and didn't come in, or did it, or in bringing the tragedy of the Mediterranean, this other one.
Traduco, per la signora c'è una reazione un po' viscerale rispetto al fatto che, sentendo questo discorso, sta pensando alla tratta dei negri, alla schiavitù.
Dei negri, eccetera. Mi interessava capire se da artisti noi,
sì,
se questa cosa noi...
Se l'avevamo presente, vuol dire.
Presente, non c'entra o...
Ma certo che c'entra. E questa è la tragedia, che c'entra tutto. Cioè quello che avviene nel Mediterraneo da 20 anni a questa parte è quello che avviene da 10.000 anni su tutta la faccia della terra. Cioè la carne umana venduta e buttata via come se non avesse valore. Quindi è verissimo il rapporto che dice la signora, è verissimo, e il nostro dramma di artisti è che non ci basta fare del buon intrattenimento per guadagnarci il pane. Noi sentiamo che la nostra, chiamatela come volete, vocazione, missione, è quella di riuscire, ed è uno strano paradosso, uno strano salto, un doppio salto mortale, riuscire a creare bellezza a partire dall'orrore. E ogni volta non è un risultato scontato in partenza, non è mai un dato acquisito, è veramente una sfida mortale. Ma torniamo sempre lì, torniamo ai libri sacri, torniamo a Moby Dick, che finisce con Ismaele che dice: solo io sono sopravvissuto e io vi posso raccontare questo, e racconta una tragedia immane nella bellezza più assoluta di quel libro. Per cui, e qui c'è la nostra condizione di esseri umani, che siamo questo, siamo in bilico tra l'orrore e la bellezza possibile del nostro stare insieme.
So definitely they thought about the slave trade mostly because at the heart of it there is the idea that human flesh has been sold and traded for the longest time throughout history. And for them, because doing theater is not entertainment and is not a way of living, but it's a way of embracing a vocation and a mission, the real double flip in the air is that of creating beauty through horror. Because all of us were always walking that tightrope between beauty and horror. It's of course a very ambitious challenge, even a deadly one, but it takes us back to the sacred books, as Marco calls them, like Moby Dick, where at the end of it, of course, Ishmael says, I am the only one who survived and I am the one who can tell the story. So in a way, the company is telling that story. And to add to this, if I may, this analogy that you're bringing to the table, which is very appropriate, has been used by some scholars, for example, to read immigration in the Mediterranean today, and because of the trafficking that is happening. And to this, I would add also the image of the concentration camp, because of the detention centers where these people are held, both in Africa and in Italy. So history repeats itself in many different ways.
And if I may add something to that, is the notion that it is true, and the comparison is very worthy and very important, but what we're living today is that this phenomenon is huge. And we talk about globalization, and we need to talk about globalization in this as well, because the phenomenon now incorporates the entire world, and there are people that are trafficked from the most different countries everywhere, and very often in slave-like conditions, if not exactly like slaves. So this is something that I think it was important to reiterate.
Absolutely. Yes?
Besides creating beauty, which you certainly do you expect to achieve any other practical results, such as, for example, influence the public opinion in Italy? I know there are strong feelings against these immigrants in Italy, especially in some parts of the population. So, for example, what was the reaction of the right-wing press to your play?
Si chiede se avete anche un obiettivo concreto con il lavoro che fate in termini di influenzare per esempio l'opinione pubblica, perché ovviamente questa è una materia che alcuni vedono piuttosto nodosa, specialmente nella destra, quindi sì. L'aspetto politico.
Sì.
Sì.
La reazione. Ma noi abbiamo debuttato con questo spettacolo nel 2010.
So we presented this in 2010 the first time.
Fino all'estate scorsa, fino all'estate del 2013, il teatro è una piccola cosa, quindi può arrivare a quante persone? A un raggio limitato di persone, e noi non abbiamo visto grandi cambiamenti nell'opinione pubblica, nonostante il nostro Rumore di Acque.
So they've presented it several times, but of course they reach small audiences, and so there is not a concrete result that they can actually report on right now.
Invece, nell'estate del 2013, Papa Francesco è andato a Lampedusa.
But in summer 2013, and this is sort of the shifting point, the Pope went to Lampedusa. This is how Stefano Albertini presented tonight's event to the audience of Casa Italiana. Then something happened.
E il grande regista russo Meyerhold, all'inizio del secolo, diceva che il Papa è l'attore più grande.
And as the Russian director said, Meyerhold, the Pope is the best actors of all.
E Papa Francesco l'ha dimostrato, che con quel gesto ha veramente cambiato qualche cosa, ma per la prima volta dopo 20 anni nell'opinione pubblica non solo italiana.
So this was demonstrated by the fact that there was a result in terms of the reaction of the public opinion on this issue.
E questo ci ha dato forza.
And this gave us strength.
Il teatro allora può fare qualcosa.
Theater maybe can do something.
Però bisogna essere degli attori molto importanti.
But you also have to be very famous actors.
Sì. No, sure. No, ma siamo noi che siamo parte della sua compagnia.
We are part of his company, as a matter of fact.
Sì. I giornali di destra, in Italia è un brutto momento questo. Oddio, non è mai che siano stati dei momenti così splendenti, ma in questo momento in particolare, per esempio la Lega Nord, che sta perdendo voti, si è rimessa, ha ripreso gli slogan più razzisti, ma più stupidamente razzisti, degli anni che io ricordavo più negli anni 80-90, li avevano un po' dimenticati. E questo perché abbiamo un ministro dell'integrazione, la Kyenge, che ha scatenato tutte le follie, le paure, i disagi più enormi di tanta gente, ma che vengono cavalcati in questo modo così brutale e stupido da certi politici e da certa stampa italiana.
And as a matter of fact, while at the same time the Pope has helped in one direction, we also register that certain media have embraced a particularly conservative response, and this is in part due to the fact that the Northern League is somewhat brushing up some of the rhetoric of the 80s and the 90s and reusing those racist discourses and slogans in a very, very trite manner, really resuscitating some of the most repressed traumas about immigration, mostly because we now have the first black minister in Italy, Minister Kyenge, and indeed it was the Lega, right, that started publishing the places where Minister Kyenge will speak publicly so that the supporters of the Northern League can actually go and protest against her. So è una caccia alle streghe at this point.
The interesting thing is that they invite their militants to show up wherever Minister Kyenge is speaking, not because they necessarily oppose something that she has done. There is interesting that there is nothing in her agenda that they can push against, but for who she is. So it's not that they accuse Kyenge of having done something wrong or that they disapprove of, but they just disapprove of the fact that she exists as a minister of the Italian Republic that happens to be black and of African origin. So that's really the racist base of it. You know, if they argued against choices that Kyenge had made, you could say, okay, that's political debate. But they actually have a problem with her being there for who she is.
Yeah, and one thing that I find in my research that is also incredibly interesting is that many of these people that probably publicly talk against immigration very often may hire an immigrant woman to care for the elderly in the family. So there is the contradiction that is at the core of what Italians do and say at the same time.
Right. Perhaps the last one, and then we'll close. Maybe another person who hasn't asked a question.
In regard to the music, is it closely scripted, or is it just an overview of composition, or is there room for improvisation where you get the same feeling with each production?
Yeah, sì, ho capito. Our compositions and some traditional music, singing. Only one, yeah. But the way we sing is the result of a long work, research, so it's quite difficult to explain by words the nature of our music.
Well, may we venture to ask you maybe to join us to the stage and give us a little taste of it. And so maybe with that we can close and also invite you to actually experience all of this on stage at La Mama from January 30th to February 16th. Let me also remind you that the first week you also get a discount, so you can come close to us and we can give you all the information. Please support this company, this work, for what it brings, as I said before, for its humanitarian message, but its artistic and literary message as well. So we hope to see you very numerous at La Mama in the next 3 long weekends. So Lorenzo and Enzo.
We sing for you the only traditional piece of play. Lamentation. No.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And all of you, as he was saying, the best applause is to come to the theater. Please come. Thank you, Francesca, Ermanna, Marco, Alessandro, Lorenzo, Enzo, and to all of you for coming tonight, and Stefano for hosting us once again.